Good morning. Some of you are passionate about your work, and there's a lot of reasons, a lot of roots. My work came to me when I was 4 years old, interestingly. I saw Fantasia. And Fantasia, if you haven't seen it, you must see it. Fantasia, especially the scene with the dinosaurs, made me decide that I wanted to be an animator. And so my father, a sculptor and art professor, taught me how to do flipbook animation, and I was literally off and running. When I was 10 years old, we moved to Europe. My dad wanted to set up an art studio in Rome, and we traveled throughout Europe for a summer. And one of the most amazing places that we traveled to was the caves of Lascaux in southern France. And unfortunately, these are no longer available for people to traipse through, but we had the great and grand privilege of being able to wander through these wonderful cathedrals of ardent observation. And I saw another cave in France also, Pont d'Arc. And anybody can recognize the critter there with the horn. That's a rhinoceros, and that is, I propose to you, the very first animatic. That is the imagination of a Cro-Magnon artist, half of whom, by the way, were women, who was telling people what a charging rhinoceros would look like and to avoid it. And so this began my own search to find out how I might prepare for my own ardent observation. And as a 15-year-old, I found the profession of medical illustration. And I decided that I would create my art and create my science in the same breath, and I went for it. Got into the program at Ohio State University, did concurrent master's work in anatomy, and then I went to medical school. It's interesting how some people have a different view of your path than you do. And my first week in medical school, the dean of my medical school called me into his office. And I had been a faculty member at that school for 3 years doing medical art. And the dean told me, "You're in my office because I just wanted to inform you that you cannot be a medical student and do illustration at the same time." And I asked him why. He said, "I think it's a conflict of interest." And I said, "Well, how is it a conflict of interest?" And he said, "Because I say it is." And I had just signed a contract for a book series that was going to pay my tuition. And he said, "Well, you have to cancel the contract or you can't study here." Well, that was a conundrum because I would have been sued to cancel the contract, and I would have been stupid to cancel the contract. And I found out it was not legal for him to constrain me such. But he did make my life miserable for 2 years. And so I took a year's leave of absence, and I worked as a physical therapy aide during the day and worked on my book at night. And I had 1 week left in my leave of absence, and I was full of fear and trepidation. And I had a phone call on a Sunday, the day after Christmas, and it was from Yale. It was a surgeon who liked my work, and he was about to start a 6-book project at Yale, and he wanted me to do the work. And he had arranged for me to become, at 28 years old, the senior medical illustrator at the Yale School of Medicine. Would I come visit him the next week? And so I said, absolutely. I'll absolutely come and visit you the next week. And it turns out, actually, this is a side thing I wasn't going to say, but I had had dinner with a young woman the night before with whom I worked. And it was just a casual dinner, but it was electric in a way I had not anticipated. So I called her up and I said, "Will you meet me for coffee? I want to tell you about this extraordinary phone call I just had." And so we met for coffee, and I said to her, "I have to go out to Yale next week. Will you come out with me? I want to introduce you to my parents." And actually, on the way out, I introduced her to Gail, who had introduced me a few weeks ago to Saul. I wanted Gail's opinion. And we've been together 35 years, and she's an amazing, amazing woman. Patty is an amazing and trusting woman. And so I had this interview at Yale, and I got the job, and I ended up doing about 4,000 of these pen and ink illustrations, but I wanted to be an animator. And so I asked my boss at Yale, and I asked the dean at Yale, could we change our department from 16th century pen and ink work to computers? And the dean of the medical school said to me, young man, there is no room in medicine for cartoons. So about 3 weeks later, I quit my job at Yale and I started the first digital medical animation company in the world without ever having actually touched or owned a computer. So, fast forward, and I taught myself how to use computers. I taught myself Unix. I taught myself digital modeling, storyboarding, copyright law, all of that kind of stuff, and forged a company. And along the way, ended up being asked by the director of the Department of Molecular and Cellular Biology at Harvard to do an experiment with him and see if we could change science education by using cinematic language, by taking the formerly blobby jelly bean shapes of proteins and use the protein data bank that was being assembled by the US government and take students through a tour of a cell in a way that had never been done. He wanted to find out if we could create a movie that would change how students saw biology by changing how they saw themselves, by changing how they thought about their own biology, by giving them an intimate view of a cell, how it moved, how it worked, how all of the exquisite machinery, the nanomachines inside the cell, functioned. And so we entered into this grand experiment, and this was never meant to be seen in public. This was meant to be shown to half of an undergraduate molecular and cellular biology class at Harvard and tested. And so the class in its entirety got the didactic stuff, got the lectures, got the online stuff, and half the class saw this movie. It was a longer version of this. It was 8.5 minutes with labels and voiceover. And the standard class got average of 70% on the exam. The half of the class that saw the movie averaged 100% on the exam. So far beyond the standard deviation that, thank you, that Rob wanted to show it to the world. So he said, let's enter it in the SIGGRAPH electronic theater. And so we did. My team and I decided that we would shorten it. We would make it a 3.5-minute film, take out the labels, take out the voiceover, and we composed a piece of music for it, which, by the way, the piece of music won a telly on its own. That was kind of weird. So it got into the electronic theater, it got a standing ovation, and instantly, this was just a few months after YouTube opened, instantly all these geeks in the theater who had gotten discs with all the samples that were shown in the movie started uploading it to YouTube, and it crashed our server for months. It was amazing, and it got me invited to the TED conference for a TED Talk, and then later on it got me invited to give a talk at a conference in China. So here I was on my way to China for an adventure in the Far East. It was really exciting, and so I went to this animation festival that was run by a friend of mine in Guiyang, China, and started a brand new adventure. This was a week after the Sichuan earthquake and right around the time of the Beijing Olympics. And so all of us foreign presenters were treated to a bus tour of Guizhou province, whose floating mountains were the inspiration of the floating mountains of Avatar. So it was really beautiful. This bus ride was a long, long trip, and we saw some amazing things. And at the beginning of the bus ride, my student translator was sitting in the other bus with his college buddies. He wasn't much for small talk. And a young lady came up to me and she said, "Is anybody sitting here with you?" Well, the bus was moving, so no. And she said, "I've never met a native English speaker. May I speak with you? May I ask you some questions?" And I said, "Absolutely, sure. Ask me anything you want." And so she asked me her first question, "Can you tell me the derivation of the word anti-disestablishmentarianism and how it might apply to China today?" In beautiful British English. And I was astonished. And over 2.5 hours of conversation, I found out that she wasn't affiliated with this conference. She had swiped a lanyard and gotten on the bus. And she was 15. And she hadn't been in school since she was forced to go into hiding at 13 because her Red Guard teacher found out that her great-grandparents had been murdered by the Red Guard in the Cultural Revolution, trying to protect their property. So she had a legacy that was unwelcome. And after she was beaten up by the kids under the direction of her teacher and survived it, they told her they would come back with weapons the next day. And several of the kids in school had disappeared, and she was very afraid. And she called her parents, who came to get her, and they pulled her out of school and put her into hiding. She had a difficult family life, the details of which I'm not going to go into, but you can imagine it was violent. So she decided to take her education on by herself, in her room, on her own terms, and do it in English, which meant learning English by herself in her room. And then she became a Shakespeare scholar. And then she became a musician. And then she came looking for someone who could rescue her. And I was so taken by her in that bus that I told her, without the ability to communicate with Patty 12 time zones away, I told her that I would move heaven and earth to get her out of China, get her to safety, and get her a proper education. And it took 3.5 years. It took 4 more trips to China. The first 24 books that I sent her got confiscated by the Chinese postal authorities. And so I had to go back and deliver things in person. She took long bike rides, 100-kilometer bike rides in the Guazhou Mountains to get away from home, to get away from the danger. Her parents arranged for her to have her name changed so that she could have papers that were legal. And still, for 6 years, she couldn't leave her home during the day because the truancy police would pick her up and arrest her parents. So she asked me, actually 4 years ago, a little over 4 years ago, if I would bring my son Alexander to China with me, which I did. And they instantly hit it off. They embraced the first time they saw each other, and it was like seeing siblings separated at birth reunited, and they're still amazingly close and wonderful kids. And so I tried to figure out how to get her a decent education. The school where my sons went, a wonderful private school in Connecticut, where John Kennedy went to high school, didn't have the balls to take her because she had no credentials. So eventually, I flew her to Hong Kong. This picture was taken about 10 minutes after she stopped me on the waterfront, just after we passed the statue of Bruce Lee. And she said, "I need to ask you something important." I said, "Please, ask me anything." She said, "After all these years of calling you sir, may I please call you Dad?" How could I say no? And so we found through a friend in Hong Kong, an American expatriate, who suggested that we try to have her apply to St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland, which uses the Great Books program, which is an amazing mirror of the program showing you use to teach yourself. And this is an example of video of one of the things that she sent in for her application.
Your eyes are lodestars and your tongue sweeter, more tunable than lark to shepherd's ear. When wheat is green, when often butter appear, sickness is catching. Oh, with favour so yours will I catch fair Hermia ere I go. My ear should catch your voice, my eye, your eye. My tongue should catch your tongue's sweet melody. Were the world mine, the trees being baited. The rest I give to be to you translated. Oh, teach me how you look, and with what art you sway the motion of Dimitri's heart. I frown upon him, yet he loves me still. Oh, that your frown will teach my smile such skill. I give him curses, and yet he gives me love. Oh, that my prayer such affection move. The more I hate, the more he follows me. The more I love, the more he hateth me. His folly, Helena, is no fault of mine, none but your beauty, with thy fault were mine. Take comfort, he no more shall see my face. Lysander and myself shall fly this place. Before the time I did Lysander see, seemed Athens as a paradise to me. Oh, then what graces of my love to dwell that he hath turned a heaven unto a hell.
So it was very difficult to get her out of China, but St. John's decided that they loved her, and they accepted her on nearly a full scholarship. And on her third application for a visa, she was in. And she's now a senior and thriving. 2.5 months after she came to the States, she was invited to have a performance debut on the zither, which she plays at the level of a master at the EG conference in Monterey. And she's completely integrated with my kids, with Alexander and Jeremiah. And it's an amazing addition to the family. And she is such an incredible beacon of light in our life. And the 1,000,000,000 to 1 chance to have met her was amazing, and she is so full of grace, and she teaches me to be humble every day, and thank you very much.